If we turn our eyes to Europe, ladies and gentlemen, we also see almost a turning away of democracy. Europe has been the site of so much violence and tension over the last 100 years. As we will soon see in this course, after the Second World War, there was devastation across Europe. The communists from Russia had liberated the eastern half, but they never left, and for 40 years they stayed and imposed their communist systems and their dictatorships on these countries behind the Iron Curtain. What communism has wrought onto Europe? Well, in 1989, as you know, the wall fell down. And in fact, those countries that Russia used to own were now independent-minded. NATO, of course, started spreading eastward. And in the 90s, not only did the former Soviet Union, Russia, not only did they go through this loss and economic chaos, they had this sense of the loss of empire, that they had lost their place in the world. And in Russia, it seems to have taken hold of the desire for a strong man to get the place back to where they were, or to get Russia back to the place where they were. There's an amazing reporter. His name is Steven Rosenberg, and he works for BBC. And I love this guy. He's a Russian expert. And Steven Rosenberg has done a great documentary on YouTube. I'm going to include it here. And it's called The Empire Strikes Back, or Russia. It's 45 minutes long, and it is fascinating on how Russia is trying to get their empire back. That they are creeping. They've already invaded the Crimea and in Ukraine, but that they are trying to be, as in the words of a Russian expert, a spoiler. They're trying to spoil it for others. They're trying to use any means necessary so that they can regain their status and their influence. We know that people like Alexander Litvinenko, who was a critic of Vladimir Putin, who was a newspaper reporter living in London, was writing negative articles about Putin. Well, we know that somebody poisoned his tea, put in nuclear isotope, and within 3 days he was dead. I want to show you a before and after picture of Litvinenko, and he said, "Putin's got me." Boris Nemtsov, for example, a few years ago, he was running against Putin as the main rival candidate. He was shot in the back of the head in Red Square. And more recently, Alexei Navalny was a major critic of Vladimir Putin. He spoke out, and about 3 weeks ago, he was poisoned mysteriously. He was rushed to Germany, and 8 hours ago, he emerged from the hospital. And the list goes on. People who criticize end up mysteriously dead. If you look at what's going on today in the Baltic region, so this is Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, there seems to be almost a misinformation campaign or fake news campaign to stir up dissent or pro-Russian feelings. We have to go back to the Ukraine. When Russia reinvaded the Ukraine, the theory or the idea that was going through Russian Ukrainians' heads were that there was this unseen right-wing fascist conspiracy that was going to unseat or take over, and we had to have Russia as a stabilizing influence. So this Steven Rosenberg came across a similar thing in Latvia, and he found that in this news article, I want to read it to you, it's fascinating, that this news article claimed that Hitler's Mein Kampf was being taken off the shelves because it was being read and it was in huge demand. And in fact, it was more widely read than the Harry Potter series. So Steven Rosenberg said, well, I've got to find this. Is this really true? And so he went to the National Library circulation, and he found that of all the libraries in Latvia, Mein Kampf was requested 139 times in 3 years. In the same amount of time, the Harry Potter series was requested 25,000 times. This is complete fake news, but it's there to destabilize. What is the end game in this, right? Russia is trying to get their place back. And of course, the chaos, they want order. And now they are sowing the seeds of chaos in other countries. It's very alarming that throughout Europe, in 1989, as we said with Russia, when the wall fell, there was this euphoria of democracy. NATO came in, that they were going to be Western aligned. But slowly, some of those former Russian satellites are now turning. Take, for example, the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko. He's been in power for 26 years. 3 women have emerged to challenge him. They claim that the last election was rigged. He won by 80%. These women have become heroes in their own country. They are also in grave danger. But the people of Belarus are rising up and protesting. They want a new leader and honest elections. In Hungary, a similar situation has occurred. After 1989, everyone was optimistic about democracy. They elected their pro-democratic leader, Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban, who used to be one of the big critics of communism in 1989, but he is now in charge in Hungary, and basically he is now starting to turn his back on democracy and make Hungary more of an authoritarian country. They believe that, in fact, Hungary is no longer a democracy. It's no longer a place of freedom of speech. In Poland as well, there's a great historian. He works for the University of Ottawa. He's a historian. His name is Jan Grabowski, and he published a book, and I'll put the book, it's called The Hunt for the Jews. And he tells the story in a very, very difficult history of the Holocaust in Poland. Jan Grabowski uncovered some very uncomfortable truths, that there were many Poles who collaborated with the Germans. There were people who saw this as an opportunity to not only advance themselves, but also to make their state a Jew-free state. And so they collaborated with the Germans. Grabowski has received death threats. He has received that the government has tried to get him fired from the University of Ottawa because these anti-Polish remarks. But ladies and gentlemen, we cannot fall for that. We cannot fall for this nationalism to say we're not going to study residential schools because it's anti-Canadian. No, it happened. It happened, ladies and gentlemen. We have to study it. Our children have to study it. Your children have to study it. We cannot turn our back on the ugly truth just because it's uncomfortable.